So, as a big Sonic and Kingdom Hearts fan, I can't help but notice that in the past, Sonic would have had some low-budget handheld spin-off games in between the main games, first their own unique brand of games and then eventually watered-down ports of the main games, and now it seems mobile phone games have taken their place. And with Kingdom Hearts, there were all these handheld spin-off games to expand the lore and story of the series while waiting for the next big game. And while it's too early to tell that that won't happen again, but, well, now we got the mobile phone game to have the storyline and starting setting up plot points for future games, seemingly taking the place of those original spin-off games.
Not to mention, despite 5 new game consoles being in development, there's no handhelds in the pipeline at all. New Xbox, new PlayStation, even a new Intellivision, the Google Stadia, the Madbox, but no new Game Boy or anything. The mobile phone killed all handhelds. As soon as the 3DS has dried up, it's over, it seems.
Yeah, I suppose there's the Nintendo Switch, but that system doesn't quite occupy the same space in my head as handhelds. Besides that, I don't feel comfortable carrying around a naked screen in my pockets when traveling around, but most games aren't really designed as handheld games. Handheld games have their own brand of logic, where it's made to be faster, in smaller chunks, to the point. I don't know, made for the express purpose that you can whip it out quickly and get ready for action immediately, where main console games are a lot more slower and bigger. Fortunately, the Switch does have some quirky indie games that feel like they follow the handheld games philosophy to a degree, but most of the time it's sold on the, now you can play real games on the go instead of those lame games nobody cares about. So, I don't know, at this point I'm not quite sold on the Switch yet as a new handheld. And of course, as far as the new systems go, there's like stuff like the Google Stadia where I'm not sure what it really is. They just call it a service, an internet connection. Does it have hardware? Is it just a controller? Does it come in the form of a handheld? I don't know how this thing works, but whatever. Anyway, we just wanted to make a video. A video as I don't know, a eulogy for handhelds? Or more specifically, the eulogy for the concept that long-running franchises have handheld companion games, I guess. Because it's that very specific thing that I fear that's gonna disappear mostly from now on. Handhelds will probably exist in some form, even if it's a Chinese knockoff Soldier Boy machine or this GPD XD Plus thing that I recently heard about might be something. Although it's mostly an emulator, not really an actual system. But yeah, so specifically talking about those little miniature versions of the main console games.
Right. Usually on the Dissected show, we're mostly arguing in favour of the grand adventure style games. But this time we take the side of simple arcade games then.
Yeah, despite using game to game as an insult often whenever video games are too focused on the pure mechanics to the detriment of everything else, I do enjoy some games just for the gameplay. It depends on how those games are selling themselves to me. If it's presented as an adventure with characters I'm supposed to care about, or if it's just literally your guy with gun, shoot, your car that drive, then that's fine. You are what you are. Especially on the handheld, that's much more made for quick on-the-go action. So with exception of RPGs, I do keep the more immersive story and context-heavy games for the main console, and mostly have dumb action games in the handheld.
Consoles are also the more social devices though. I mean, if you have friends over, quickly grab a round of Smash Brothers together.
Hey, I'm an antisocial nerd. I only have guests over twice a year or something. Anyway, handhelds. Handheld-based spin-offs of big franchises. So, from the Game Boy on, we've had...
Well, there's Game & Watch first, and the Tiger electronic devices.
Yes. From those on, there was a nice little dynamic going on. You got the big console, the highly priced, proud in the living room, super machine, with all the latest innovations and grandest games companies could dream up. And then you got a smaller, lower budget little sidekick, giving you little miniature experiences that's a little more humble. Now that role has been taken up by mobile phone games, doing pretty much the same thing, with only a tiny difference. As in, handheld games are, well, games, while mobile phone games are voluntary brain lab experiments. Instead of playing a game and gaining joy through experiencing adventure, overcoming challenging and skillful feats, now you can just press a button for a prize to immediately get your dopamine boosts. Oh yeah. Mobile phone games, cutting out the middleman. Very efficient. Just too bad the middleman was the actual game of the game equation. And instead, whenever I'm playing those games, I feel like those lap monkeys who keep pounding the button to get a peanut. Luke, you play mobile phone games?
I don't really play mobile games that much. They're pretty much time wasters with paywalls. When I had a Windows phone, I had a Tomb Raider game that was like Temple Run, and it was fun seeing Lara Croft crashing into walls and smacking her head on a tree branch. I also had Sonic Dash, which was fun at first, but it got incredibly boring as it's the same seaside hill zone all the time, and there was no sense of level progression.
I suppose it's pulling a Pokemon and makes collecting in and on itself the progression. But yeah, besides the catching them all part, it's just Green Hill Zone eternally looping, yeah.
And you appear to fight only Zaz and Eggman, so I pretty much gave up. Currently I've been playing Fire Emblem Heroes from time to time as I like the series. I'm more into collecting the heroes rather than putting them through battles. You just select an orb and hope it's some character you might recognise from the series, or it's some person you probably never heard of, unless you played one of the 3DS games. It's just a fun addicting thing to pass the time on my bus ride to work.
Yeah, collecting characters, collecting medals, that's what they're all about. I spend way more time and money than I want to admit on the Crazy Taxi games, Sonic Dash, Kingdom Hearts UX, and Sega Heroes. Thing is, though, I'm not sure if I really enjoy playing them. Almost more like doing chores. Makes me feel dirty that I spend so much time on it. Just to feel like the game keeps telling me what to do. Keeps telling me to do the dishes, clean my room every day, and only then get all those sweet, sweet characters. I'm weak. That said, it is fun in a way to quickly play them if I have to wait for a minute or something. Well, fun. It's easy dopamine, I suppose. They trick your brain. It's psychological warfare. And besides, if I'm for a long terrain ride or airplane ride or some other circumstances where I know I have to wait for a long time, I'm not sure if it's going to be mobile phone games I'm playing. I want something with actual meat on the bones, and I'm pretty sure most nerds will agree.
Yeah, when I heard Metal Slug is revived, some weird medal collecting strategy game isn't what I had in mind. Give us a real Metal Slug game. Even the slower and less intense Neo Geo Pocket and Game Boy Advance versions are preferable.
I'm hearing an upcoming Mega Man X mobile phone game is actually designed to be more like an actual game where you need a peripheral on your phone to play it? Sounds interesting. But yeah, Mega Man X is finally resurrected just for it to be a weird mobile phone meta game. And don't get me started on Commander Keen. My poor boy. But yeah, modern phones don't have buttons anymore, and touchscreen imitating buttons is kind of annoying, so yeah, we're at an end of an era. Well, okay, not the end of an era, I'm sure. Handheld games will continue on in some form or another, whether it's a Raspberry Pi device or the Nintendo Switch. But its golden era is definitely over. So, handhelds. In a time where Sonic went full 3D, did 2D Sonic die? Nope, he was right there on your trusted Game Boy Advance. When Kingdom Hearts 3 took 15 years to be developed, did the series lay cold dead on the ground? No. There were sleeps to be birthed, and distant dreams to be dropped. When Mega Man seemed to be dead, there was Mega Man Zero, Mega Man ZX, the PSP remakes, keeping the dream alive. Well, for a bit longer before it still died, and now gets resurrected again. And those games rarely get any respect. They're just not as big and grand and perfect or dramatic as their big main console brothers and sisters and other genders. And yet, now handhelds are on the verge of extinction, and we sit at the sunset of a long history of Game Boys, Soulja Boys, Game Gears, Neo Geo Pockets, PSPs, 3DSs. I wanted to talk what those games could do, what role they could play as the smaller little companion to the big boys and girls.
Right. I fondly remember the weekend after my 12th birthday on April 98, when I went to Argos and spent my birthday money on an original Game Boy with Super Mario Land 1 and 2.
Late bloomer, huh? Dreamcast was nearly released around that time. Well, in Japan.
Well, I was into Lego as a kid, but that was discussed in another video. Anyway, funny story due to my childhood stupidity. When I got the Game Boy Color the following Christmas, I thought that it converts all your Game Boy games into full colour due to seeing screenshots of Wario Land 2 in full colour. So I was really confused when I put Mario Land in and it just showed a few colours and I thought it was broken. I found out what I saw was a port of Wario Land 2, and that was where I learned about re-released ports.
I don't know if we were dumb as kids or Nintendo just sucked in advertising, but I remember something like that too. But then with the Super Game Boy, a device that lets the Super Nintendo read Game Boy games, the kids showed me off their Super Game Boys world telling me that you could add colors to the Game Boy games. So in my head I imagined the device having a paint program on it, where you can pause the video game and start literally coloring in the individual sprites. But no, it's still monochromatic. The device just lets you pick which singular color it shades with.
Yeah, Nintendo seems terrible at causing confusion around their new systems. I mean, there was a lot of confusion around the Wii U too, right? Or to keep it handheld in the 90s, how about the Virtual Boy? They sell it to you as virtual reality. Ah, so you're going to get sucked into the device and be right there with Mario having adventures? But no, it's just stereoscopic 3D visuals. On a device louder than a Game Boy Color since it's still just one color.
Yeah, Nintendo. But hey, I'm a Sega guy, so I grew up with the Sega Game Gear. I wanted in a contest where you had to design your own video game for a peanut butter company. I could choose between a Game Gear or a Game Boy with Tetris as prize. I never heard of Sega at the time. I had no idea what that was, but I hated Tetris because everyone was constantly playing it. So just because Tetris was included with the Game Boy, I immediately went for the other system. That had columns included, basically Sega's own Tetris. So much good that did for me. But barely a month later, the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon debuted on TV, and I loved that show, so I could immediately start buying games for it. How convenient.
Right, so the both of us grew up with a handheld instead of the main console, so we grew up with the lesser Mario and Sonics. Funny that.
Yeah, anime games weren't as bulky and experimental as they would become generations later, so at this point, the handheld games were just inferior versions of the big games rather than complete alternative takes on the franchise. So our story of how the handheld spin-offs had their own value didn't quite start yet.
Well, one other thing I liked when the Game Boy Advance came out was that handhelds are usually a generation behind. It was a breath of fresh air that in a time where every game had to be in 3D, you had the GBA carrying on the sacred tradition of the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive. Including direct ports, and seeing as I didn't have any 16-bit consoles growing up, the Game Boy Advance lets me see what I was missing out, like A Link to the Past and Final Fantasy IV. It's great to play these great games on the go without having to set up the TV to play it. Thanks to the GBA, I could finally see why Sonic 1 was such a masterpiece through its amazing 2006 anniversary port.
Yeah, well, the DS and the PSP gave you better alternatives later.
While the advanced games never got the respect or acclaim of their elder 16-bit brothers, it was still nice to get a little what-if scenario, see what kind of games we might have gotten if the 3D era never happened. And like you said, gave people a 2D Sonic when he had died out, gave Mario fans a new 2D Mario when it was all 3D collectathons. Although we only got an actual proper new 2D Mario game after the cheap bastards at Nintendo stopped chopping up Super Mario All-Stars in pieces and selling that game in bits. Although speaking of new Super Mario Bros., it was on the Wii as well. So are you sure we had the handheld to thank for that game?
Well, sure they did, after the DS version sold millions of copies. Anyway, and what you see with Sonic, the main games, they have a big budget, so big expectations, big risks. So they're often this hybrid between being a regular Sonic game where people want it to be and some experimental new thing, the shiny new gimmicks that's meant to lure in new people and keep the series fresh, the things that only Sonic Team themselves want. You keep getting those hybrid games, not quite Sonic, not quite whatever their new gimmick is supposed to be, but a Frankenstein of both. So far, we never had a proper, actual 3D Sonic game. There's always some trickery, some twists, some alien elements included. With low-budget handheld spin-offs, there's less pressure of success, so they're more willing to just make a pure Sonic game with no weird gimmicks attached. And when you do get gimmicky Sonic games, they go all the way, like Sonic Battle or Dark Chronicles.
It's why I wish they would have gotten to a 3D Sonic game on the handhelds. Maybe then we would have finally have gotten a clean 3D Sonic platformer. But alas. It's not always the case that handheld versions are cleaner versions, though. Kingdom Hearts seems to be the opposite. Square Enix didn't know how to make a proper Kingdom Hearts game for the GBA, so you get this weird, stupid card game instead. I don't understand why. How hard is it to make a 2D Kingdom Hearts game? Just make it like a Zelda game. Zelda Minish Cap worked great, didn't it? Make that, except with Keyblades and Disney dungeons, and you're set without resorting to stupid card game nonsense.
Yeah, that's frustrating. It really depends on what kind of person you get to design the handheld games. Sometimes they're smart enough to understand you can't just make a straight handheld version of the game you're adapting, so they simplify it to something that's more suitable. I love this Medal of Honor game that changed from realistic World War II shooter to a top-view arcade shooters like Ikari Warriors, for example. But when you get the directors of the main games meddling with it, they still desperately try to get the handheld version to be like the main one. Like Metal Gear Solid. Once again, so focused on getting the PSP ports graphically close to the latest main ones that they resorted to a stupid turn-based card system where the gameplay doesn't work. Like, why not just make more old school Metal Gear games? Wouldn't that make more sense on the handhelds? Like Babylon Tower did? Not to mention it provides Metal Gear fans with an alternative. Since Metal Gear Solid 2, Hideo Kojima just couldn't get himself to just make a plain straightforward Metal Gear game anymore. There's always gotta be a weird twist. He always has to pull out the rug under the player.
Yeah, do you like Solid Snake? Well, screw you, here's Raiden, or Snake's evil ancestor. Okay, fine, I'll give you Solid Snake, but now he's an old fart. Suck on that, Metal Gear fans.
Right, the big games always need to be some weird abstract event. Fine, but why not make the handheld spin-offs the more straightforward Solid Snake adventures that fans want instead? Sure, make them all non-canon if it bothers you that much that Solid Snake gets to have a normal adventure for once. Give the fans an alternative. Gotta focus back on the sneaking around bases from a top-down perspective so fans can scratch that itch while the main games are going nuts with whatever new fever dream Kojima had that week. Of course, eventually the Metal Gear games on the handheld did become complicated enough that they could actually properly imitate an actual Metal Gear game, although they were in the style of the modern ones. And now Kojima is not allowed to make any Metal Gear games anymore, so now this whole debate is off the table. Hooray!
Still, I have to disagree with you there. I like handheld games experimenting. I know they get a bit of flack, but I quite like the DS Zeldas, even if they were vehicle restricted and make you explore this hub dungeon over and over. But what was interesting about Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks is that they were made to show off what the DS was capable of. I love the gimmick of writing notes or marking areas in a map that I kinda wish they kept in future games. In Breath of the Wild you use coloured markers. It's kinda hard to remember what markers you used for what.
Ugh, I can't stand action games that have to control with the stylus. Great, thanks game, now I got my big fat hand blocking the gameplay screen all the time. Brilliant.
Yeah, and I found the microphone unresponsive as you have to yell into it saying, "I want the anchor! Give me the anchor!" And the guy cannot hear you.
Ugh, I hate the microphone even more. I'm just playing my dumb little action game while I'm riding the bus or whatever, and all of a sudden the game wants me to talk or blow into the microphone while I'm surrounded by people. Great, I already look like a pathetic asshole on my own, thanks. I don't need your help to look like an even bigger jackass in public, Nintendo. What moron thought that was a good idea?
Oh, and Zelda Spirit Tracks. It made train driving fun. Does Train Simulator 4000 have you fighting other trains via a cannon and encounter a demonic version of Gordon from Thomas? It also had Princess Zelda as your sidekick, possessing a suit of armour like Alphonse Elric, making this game have the most involvement from the princess in the entire series. No, Wand of Gamelon and Zelda's adventure doesn't count.
Wasn't there a train simulator that had a zombie survival mode? Anyway, I could never stand the art style for especially Spirit Tracks. You make an adventure fantasy game about trains, so go steampunk. I want to see big, epic Victorian train stations, big, majestic steam engines billowing smoke, men walking with top hats, and women in high-status dresses. This is what I think of when you give me the concept of an adventure game with trains, not this stupid Thomas the Train Engine shit with the finished game. Ugh.
Like Final Fantasy VII? There's an idea. I think this game was inspired when Eiji Onuma saw his son play with toy trains.
Well, when I was a kid, it was those epic train miniatures that kids love to play with, not some stupid plastic joke train.
Also, the toon shading was chosen because with realistic graphics, it would make the characters poorly scaled to their surroundings. I think that's what the development team said.
Then just make it to scale. I've seen games do that on the DS. Look at Lufia, or here. Oh my god, how do you pronounce that name? Solato Robo Retta Hunter. Anyway, like this is what an adventurous train station should look like on a DS. And it's still toony and stylized. But, never mind. I don't care about Zelda games anyway, so they can make it look as stupid as they want anyway. But we're off topic, so back to handheld games as a concept, as a direction. Gimmicks. See, that alone is why the PSP is my favorite handheld over the DS. Despite the DS having way better games, and in some cases I even enjoy the graphics more than that system, but it's still those stupid gimmicks, where my fun little action games are constantly interrupted by stupid shit from the microphones or touchscreen minigames. Just let me play my dumb little action game, for God's sake.
Hey, don't forget that it's these gimmicks that put Nintendo on the map. What's the most successful handheld game ever? Pokemon. Because it's a dumb little action game, or because it did smart things of socializing and trading? In fact, I own 2 Game Boys. I got Pokemon Red and Blue and a link cable so I could trade with myself. It was easier than trying to find someone to trade with in an era before Wi-Fi.
I suppose. Look, I'm not against gimmicks in and on themselves. There's plenty of games where I enjoy having a touchscreen controls. Phoenix Wright, theme park sims. Heck, even sometimes in action games can pull it off. Like I love how the boats control in Sonic Rush Adventure with a touchscreen. It can be done, but sometimes it feels like Nintendo held a gun to developers' head to force their gimmicks in where they don't belong.
I get what you mean. But yeah, speaking of franchises staying alive on the Game Boy, another handheld series I liked was Castlevania. I was introduced to the series with a GBA double pack of Harmony of Dissonance and Aria of Sorrow. They follow the same formula of the Metroidvanias that originated with Symphony of the Night, with backtracking and just killing tons of skeletons along the way. It was Aria of Sorrow that got me interested in the franchise, as you get to still the souls of your enemies to use as abilities, as well as a gripping plot that leads to the interesting twist. It results in you fighting a powered up Julius Belmont with a rocking theme song playing. I got all Castlevania games for the GBA and DS, not the Game Boy ones sadly, although I heard Belmont's Revenge was pretty good, and I have the WiiWare Rebirth version of Castlevania The Adventure.
I never liked the Metroidvania games, although I did play and enjoy Circle of the Moon to a degree. But give me the old Game Boy Castlevanias any day. Awesome music. Although the PSP Dracula X Chronicles game is my favorite, probably. I feel the straight action Castlevanias are more suited for a handheld gameplay. Jump in and instant action, instead of constantly having to remember where you've been in this giant maze, when you just play the games in bits here and there.
I disagree. With its RPG system, it's great to play in parts. I never feel like I wasted my time if I just play the game for a few minutes if I gained better equipment. Anyway, yeah, good to see that 2D Castlevanias were alive and kicking on the handhelds, while their main console big brothers were stumbling around trying to find their footing, until Castlevania Lords of Shadow, which I really enjoy.
Right, but I don't just want to list games we like one by one, otherwise this video is going to go on forever, because there's tons of fun games. Another personal thing I have about handhelds, any console with forceful limitations, really. I guess the upcoming Atari console would also apply to this. This is probably just me, but one thing I absolutely love about old school games, or the older generation, is, well, older 3D games didn't always have the possibility to have in-game complicated lighting systems programmed into the engine itself. So what you often get is that shading and color depth has to be directly created by the textures, by the game art in and on itself. And sometimes what happens when you get more creative and daring people working on them is that they give it more artistic flair. So instead of just a light source and let the computer calculate all the parts of the environment that are lighter and darker shaded, you get more stuff like this. These color palettes, that there's more weird and daring colors used. Bushes have the part of the light effects on them, and you get stronger color contrasts. You get this painting effect, where the shadows start having a personality rather than just merely being shade. I mean, don't get me wrong, not many games do this. You don't see it very often on the handheld games. I only see it now and then. But I love the effect when I see it. And of course, modern games on modern systems can also do that. But again, forcing people to work on a more limited system forces them quicker to start being more daring with the art style, because you cannot make it realistic. You have to have some sort of stylization going on. You know, art through limitation, kind of force creative people to make daring decisions instead of just giving them the easy way out. It's kind of like the video game music. When a composer doesn't have access to complicated instruments but has to rely on a very limited set of sounds that come with the system, the NES 8-bit chip music and all that, there's a much bigger focus on making the melody in and on itself as powerful as possible. While when games can have full orchestras and have everything they want, the melody becomes less important to have an effect, and instead it just becomes more background noise.
Well, modern handheld games like those on the PSP and Vita are complex enough that they can have lighting systems built in the engine like any modern game, so this no longer matters now. Although the 3DS still has a lot of games with that style of graphics. Yokai Watch looks like a 3D version of a painted anime backdrop, especially in close-ups.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. But again, having a handheld being a generation behind kind of forces artists to be more creative. Oh, and not to mention, smaller screen. Games just have to communicate their artwork better when they're on a small screen, so artists are yet again forced to spend a lot more time thinking about color palettes, about style, about communication. On consoles, it has to be self-imposed challenges rather than necessity, and let's face it, most of the time they take the lazy way out. And artistic brilliance can come even from unlikely places. I never expected Asphalt, a Burnout knockoff game, to have this level of artistic insight. Sometimes trains just looking like a cheap plastic toy just works visually much better on a small screen than realistic, awesome looping train stations. And I think I'm shooting myself in the foot now.
Anyway, despite the handheld versions usually being considered inferior, there's some where I vastly prefer them over their big brothers. It's why I went for the 3DS port of Smash Bros. 4 and skipped over the Wii U version, as I feel it to be exactly the same as Melee and Brawl. Some new characters maybe, but that's it. But it was the first time that we got a handheld version of Smash Bros. And in 3D, and it was more easier and fun to play with others. I remember a friend of mine who played as Yoshi kicking my ass. Fun times.
And actually having a fun single-player mode. Yeah, I prefer the handheld version too, although I eventually bought the Wii U version too. It's usually for when I have friends over. Yeah, some games just work better on a handheld for some reason. Especially those trial and error and hard Nintendo-style games. I have more patience for those when I just try them over and over whenever I have a bathroom break, rather than having to sit through all the failures in a row. I wish Mega Man 11 or Mighty Number 9 had a handheld version. Of course, Mighty Number 9 should have been on the 3DS and Vita, but that never happened for some reason. Hooray?
And Sonic Colors on the DS was way better too.
Yeah, and sometimes the handheld simplifying the main game is an immense improvement. I tend to prefer the LEGO insert franchise games more on the handheld, as the main games got increasingly more bloated and slow and more focused on locking you in one location and making you do puzzles for 20 minutes, while their handheld cousins were much more action-orientated and fast-paced. Well, sometimes, it kind of depends. Some of the LEGO games have a weird top-view puzzle game effect to them. Some were literally copying the main console game, that was a waste. But a lot of them also just do their own thing, and they're always my favorites.
Still, it can be impressive when they manage to get a perfect recreation of a main console game on a handheld. The 3DS ports of the N64 Zeldas and Star Fox 64 were pretty good, as it was so impressive seeing these on a portable system with enhanced 3D graphics.
Star Fox seems to be made for handhelds. Many short missions, straightforward arcade action. Too bad the only original handheld Star Fox game had this weird strategy game nonsense going on.
Right. Star Fox on the 3DS knew exactly what it needed to be. A straightforward action arcade game, and I love it for it. While the Wii U version just had to do something with the Wii U gimmicks, and completely self-sabotaged itself over it. What a shame. So, a toast. A toast to the handheld spin-offs, that in times when the main games are all experimental and flying off the rails and doing crazy things, their handheld brethren kept the fort on the traditional gameplay fans wanted.
And a non-toast for when the developers still forced them to closely resemble the main console games and just made them slow and stable disasters. Right, any specific handheld games you want to shill before we leave?
Well, I say no 3DS game library is complete without playing Kid Icarus Uprising. It's like watching a cinematic masterpiece, seeing Pit flying through the skies taking down giant monsters and gods with epic music playing in the background. I also love the banter between Pit and his boss Palutena, and their version of Hades is just as awesome as Disney's Hades. Man, Hades has some great interpretations. Or, if you're into GBA RPGs, there's the Golden Sun games, which has a great story, world and characters, interesting puzzles, as well as the gin collecting and managing. There's also a third game for the DS, which they ended on a bloody cliffhanger. Where's Golden Sun 4, Camelot?
I can't stand Golden Sun, to be honest. Those cutscenes have terrible pacing and rhythm. Everyone repeats themselves over and over. Every statement gets a reaction from other characters. It just drags.
Currently been playing Fire Emblem Sacred Stones from the GBA, which is a pretty interesting turn-based strategy game, and it can be stressful keeping everyone alive. But I love the characters and Game of Thrones-like medieval politics.
I'll go to Suikoden if I want medieval politics. To be fair, I never played Fire Emblem, just not into strategy stuff. Alright, Suikoden also had handheld games. I haven't tried them, to be honest, since they don't seem to be canon with the main games.
I also have a PS Vita, which is my only PlayStation console, so I can have a little look in the world of PlayStation. I have the PS1 version of Crash Team Racing on there, but found it a bit frustrating to play on the Vita, as the controls hurt my hands a lot. But I had a lot of fun playing the Spyro trilogy, Medieval Resurrection, God of War games, and a few Castlevania games like the Rondo of Blood remake. I have a problem with my Vita, where menus and characters would sometimes erratically move on their own, but I don't let that bother me too much. Also impressive were the Vita ports of God of War 1 and 2. You'd never think a game that big could fit on a tiny system, and it's easier now to pick up and play these games instead of having to turn on the telly and the console, and something to play in short bursts if you got half an hour to kill or something.
My recommendations. On the DS, I love Tony Hawk Downhill Jam as a time waster. Solo Road to Robo Rat the Hunter is a neat game for those who want to see a rare, serious RPG starring furries. It's a sequel to Teo Consero of the PlayStation 1, which is a bit of a Mega Man Legends knockoff, so I love that. Weird that your main attack move is throwing things. Apparently it's getting a third game in the series later this year, Fuga, although that seems to be a dark, edgy strategy game, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna like that as much as the original two. Other games I love is Asphalt 2, a nice fast-paced Burnout style game. And on PSP I love Chili Con Carnage. From Voltage, the makers of Saints Row, but this is a Mexican-based action game with typical Max Payne style slow-mo. Fun to rack up long combos and score a lot of points. It's a remake of a PlayStation 2 game. That was more of a Grand Theft Auto style game in Mexico, but this one drops the open world stuff. Ken Kabancho, Japanese series. I think only the third game got a Western release. Ken Kabancho, Badass Rumble. You're a high school delinquent walking around town, looking so intense you're shooting laser beams from your eyes that challenges other punks to a fight. Insult them correctly and you'll knock them out straight. So it's basically a 3D River City Ransom, although with a morality meter. I love it. It's fun to annoy civilians too. I even imported the fifth game from Japan. I can't understand the story, but I can at least figure out the gameplay. And I love the Pursue Force series. I always love the idea of jumping on top of racing vehicles. And as for systems itself, I recently learned about this GPD XD Plus gamepad machine emulator thing. I'm not sure what this is. I'm hearing good things about it and bad things, so I'm not sure how much I can recommend it. I never touched it myself. I'm thinking about maybe buying it when I go to America in a month. It's a Chinese rip-off handheld system which is made to emulate like Android games and such, but also has an emulator for retro games up to the Dreamcast even though it's doing it terribly. But yeah, this exists for those who, just like me, are kind of sad for the death of the handheld system.
But hey, with games like Mega Man 11, Sonic Mania, the upcoming Earthworm Jim 3, an actual Earthworm Jim 3, not 3D, it's not over for simplified spin-off games. Anyway, with the upcoming Intellivision Amico system being branded as a remake of old Atari games, and even 16-bit games like Earthworm Jim, there seems to be a future in smaller action games even outside the indie market.
Oh yeah, although that system is 2D only though, and probably mostly American-based. I mean, it's still gonna be great, but I'm gonna miss the quirky 3D Japanese games. Although those still exist occasionally, I find them on the PlayStation 4 sometimes. I recently found this Akiba's Beat, which seems to be like some sort of Persona cheap rip-off thing. But this video has gone on long enough, so bye-bye.
Yeah, see ya. Pub?